In the annals of the great northern realm, as chronicled and returned to the quiet archives of the Football Monastery, there existed a hunger that had gnawed at the bones of the faithful for 3 decades. Since the days of the blessed Sir Matt Busby in the year of our Lord 1968, the glittering chalice of Europe, the Champions League, had remained elusive, a relic lost to time and memory. The Red Devils, warriors of Old Trafford, had conquered the shires of England time and again, yet the continent remained a fortress impenetrable. Sir Alex Ferguson, the fiery patriarch of the clan, looked upon the wasteland of European ambition with a heavy heart. He sought not merely victory, but a crusade that would eclipse all crusades, a trinity of conquests that would etch the name of Manchester into the bedrock of eternity. The 1998-99 campaign was to be their pilgrimage through the Valley of Shadows, a journey undertaken to reclaim the destiny stolen by years of misfortune. The first trial of the Trinity began upon the muddy fields of the English Premier League. It was a war of attrition, fought tooth and nail against the Gunners of Highbury, a formidable legion led by the strategist Arsene Wenger. The campaign was long and fraught with peril, culminating on the 16th day of May. The enemy was Tottenham Hotspur, and the battlefield was the sacred ground of Old Trafford. Though the visitors drew first blood, the resilience of the united brethren turned the tide. With a 2-1 victory, snatched from the jaws of anxiety, they secured the domestic crown by a single point. The first jewel was set into the hilt of their sword, yet there was no time for feasting. The road beckoned them onward, for destiny does not rest for the weary. Scarcely had the echoes of the League triumph faded when the Legion marched south to the great Cathedral of Wembley on the 22nd of May. The adversary was the Magpies of Newcastle, a clan from the far north seeking their own glory. But the momentum of the Red Devils was a force of nature, akin to a rising tide that no wall could withstand. Substitutes Teddy Sheringham and Paul Scholes, knights who would play pivotal roles in the days to come, struck the blows that felled the Magpies. A 2-0 victory secured the FA Cup, the second pillar of the Holy Trinity. Now the faithful dared to whisper the forbidden word, treble. 2 kingdoms had been conquered, only the Empire of Europe remained. The final destination of this pilgrimage was the Camp Nou in Barcelona, a colosseum of stone and spirit, chosen to host the final rite in the centenary year of its local guardians. It was the 26th of May, a day destined for legend. However, the Red Devils marched with a limp, for their captains, the warrior Roy Keane and the artisan Paul Scholes, were banished from the field, suspended by the cruel laws of the tournament. The army was leaderless in the center, forced to reshuffle its ranks against the might of Bavaria. Over 90,000 souls gathered under the Spanish sky, the air thick with humidity and anticipation. It was not merely a game, it was a collision of history, a duel under the gaze of the heavens. Facing them stood the Teutonic giants, Bayern Munich. They were a machine of discipline and iron, led by the veteran Lothar Matthäus, a general who had seen 1,000 battles. and guarded by the Titan Oliver Kahn, a goalkeeper who roared like a beast protecting its lair. Like United, they too sought a treble, having ravaged their own lands. They were not a foe to be trifled with. They were the embodiment of efficiency and power. As the teams took to the field, the atmosphere was akin to the silence before a thunderclap. The referee, the piercing-eyed Pierluigi Collina, stood ready to officiate this judgment of souls. The battle was barely joined when disaster struck the English camp. In the 6th minute, a lapse in judgment, a moment of weakness, allowed Mario Basler of Bayern to stand over a dead ball outside the penalty area. With the precision of an archer, he fired a low, curling shot that evaded the wall and the despairing grasp of Peter Schmeichel. The net rippled, and the German sector of the amphitheatre erupted in guttural triumph. The score was 1-0. The Red Devils had been pierced early, a wound that threatened to bleed them dry. For the first time, the weight of destiny felt not like wings, but like a millstone around their necks. For an eternity, or so it seemed, the Bavarians held the high ground. They laid siege to the united goal, their discipline unyielding. The English warriors fought bravely, but their creative spark was dimmed without their suspended captains. Bayern came close to driving the final nail into the coffin. Mehmet Scholl chipped the ball against the post, and Carsten Janker struck the crossbar with a bicycle kick that shook the frame of the goal. It was as if the wood itself was alive, rejecting the German advance, preserving a sliver of hope by divine intervention. The Red Devils were bending, groaning under the pressure, but they did not break. The sands of the hourglass ran thin. The 90 minutes were spent. The fourth official raised the board of time, signaling 3 minutes of added grace. To the eyes of the mortal, all was lost. In the stands, the Bayern ribbons were already being tied to the great silver trophy. The UEFA president, Leonard Johansson, left his seat to descend to the pitch, preparing to crown the Germans. The Bavarian fans lit flares of victory, their songs drowning out the prayers of the Manchester faithful. It was the darkest hour, the moment when faith is tested against the cold, hard reality of defeat. But Sir Alex Ferguson was a man who trafficked in hope when all others saw despair. He had played his final cards, introducing 2 fresh knights to the fray, Teddy Sheringham and the baby-faced assassin Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. They were sent forth not with complex tactics, but with a desperate mandate: chaos. They were to disrupt the German order, to seek spaces where none existed. As the clock ticked into the 91st minute, United won a corner. Peter Schmeichel, the Great Dane, abandoned his goal to join the attack, a final, frantic act of total war. David Beckham, the artisan of the dead ball, swung the corner into the cauldron. The German defense, momentarily confused by the presence of the giant Schmeichel, failed to clear. The ball fell to Ryan Giggs on the edge of the box. His shot was poor, a scuffed effort, but Providence guided it. It found the feet of Teddy Sheringham, who, with the instinct of a predator, swiveled and struck. The ball pierced the bottom corner of the net. 1-1. The camp now erupted. The Bayern players collapsed to the turf, their certainty shattered in a heartbeat. They had been seconds from glory, and now they were dragged back into the mortal coil. The air had changed. The German juggernaut was no longer a machine. They were men, frightened and bewildered. They could not comprehend the theft that had just occurred. United, conversely, were possessed by a spirit of invincibility. They did not settle for extra time. They sensed blood in the water. From the restart, they pressed again. Another corner was won. The clock read 93 minutes. The stadium held its breath, a collective intake of air that seemed to suck the oxygen from the sky. Beckham stood over the ball once more. He delivered it into the box, a high, arcing cross. Sheringham, the hero of moments prior, rose above the fray and nodded the ball downward. And there, lurking in the 6-yard box like a phantom, was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. He reacted faster than thought itself, thrusting out a boot to redirect the ball into the roof of the net. 2-1. Bedlam, madness, ecstasy. In the span of 2 minutes, the world had turned upside down. The Red Devils had not just equalized, they had stolen the crown from the very brow of the king. The final whistle blew moments later, but it was barely audible over the din. Pierluigi Collina would later describe the sound not as a cheer, but as a lion's roar, a primal release of energy that shook the foundations of Catalonia. The scene upon the pitch was a tapestry of starkest contrast. The Bayern giant Samuel Kuffour beat the earth in uncontrollable grief, a broken man. The United players danced in a delirium of joy. They had walked through the fire and emerged not just unscathed, but sanctified. The impossible had been made flesh. As Schmeichel lifted the great trophy, cartwheeling in his joy, the prophecy was fulfilled. Premier League, FA Cup, Champions League, the treble. It was a feat never before achieved by an English club, a holy trinity of silver that shone with a blinding radiance. They had climbed the highest peak, staring into the abyss of defeat, and found wings to soar. Manchester United was no longer just a club. They were a legend, a myth written in real time, their names inscribed in the Book of Immortals. And for the architect of this miracle, the reward was absolute. The son of Govan, the fierce shepherd of this flock, was called before the throne of the realm. In the weeks that followed, Alex Ferguson became Sir Alex, a knight of the realm, honored for his service to the beautiful game. But his true knighthood had been earned on that balmy night in Barcelona, in the dying seconds of a siege that will be sung of for 1,000 years. As the echoes of that night settled, and the story found its place among the chronicles of the Football Monastery, it rests there, kept in vigil by the scribes, until another evening summons another tale to be recounted. The night Manchester United stole time itself, and in doing so, changed the world of football forever. In the annals of the game, as quietly preserved by the chroniclers of the Football Monastery, before the great campaign had commenced, There existed a prophecy that was met with scorn by the scribes and doubters of the realm. Arsene Wenger, the tall and studious elder who presided over the Highbury congregation, had dared to whisper of perfection a year prior. He spoke of a brotherhood that could traverse the perilous road of a full season without suffering the stain of defeat. Though his words were mocked as arrogance in the year of our Lord 2002, the seed of belief was planted in the soil of North London. When the summer sun of 2003 rose, the fellowship of the gun gathered, not with the weight of expectation, but with a quiet, steely resolve. They were a legion assembled from the corners of the earth, Gallic flair, Teutonic steel, and English grit, united under a banner of red and white. They prepared to march upon a path no modern army had successfully navigated, seeking to emulate the ancient legends of Preston, whose ghosts had walked alone for a century. To understand the crusade, one must first understand the temple in which the rites were performed. Highbury was not merely a stadium, it was a cathedral of intimacy and intensity. Unlike the cavernous bowls of the modern era, Highbury pressed the faithful tight against the sacred turf. The breath of the crowd could be felt on the necks of the players. The roar of the congregation was a physical force, trapping the opposing knights within a cauldron of noise. It was a place with a soul, ancient and heavy with history, where the Art Deco halls echoed with the triumphs of old. In this season of miracles, the stadium itself seemed to conspire with the hosts, its narrow pitch serving the swift, rapier-like counterattacks of Wenger's men, while suffocating the expansive ambitions of their foes. It was here, upon this hallowed rectangle of green, that the foundation of immortality was laid, stone by unyielding stone. The roster of this grand company reads like a litany of saints in the scripture of football. At the vanguard stood Thierry Henry, the king of Highbury, a man possessed of such speed and grace that he seemed to glide above the mud where others trudged. He was the lance tip, sharp and deadly. Behind him, the captain, Patrick Vieira, a colossus who strode the midfield like a general in the heat of battle, his long strides devouring the ground and breaking the will of the enemy. Guarding the gate was the mad monk Jens Lehmann, a German custodian of fierce temperament who allowed no sphere to pass him without a struggle. Flanking them were the stalwart defenders, Campbell the Rock, Toure the energetic squire, Lauren the warrior, and Ashley Cole the swift herald. Together with the creative sorcery of Bergkamp and Pires, they formed a phalanx that was perfectly balanced between the brutal necessity of defense and the exquisite art of attack. The crusade faced its most perilous trial early in the autumn, on the 21st day of September, at the fortress of their great northern rivals, Manchester United. It was a violent skirmish, dubbed the Battle of Old Trafford. The air was thick with malice, and the clashing of shins echoed like swords. As the sands of time ran out, a dark fate seemed to befall the Arsenal. A penalty was awarded to the enemy. The Dutchman Van Nistelrooy, executioner of many, stepped forward to deliver the death blow to the unbeaten dream. But the gods of football are fickle. His strike, thunderous and true, was repelled not by the keeper, but by the wood of the crossbar itself. The sound of leather striking timber rang out like a bell of salvation. The ensuing melee, a chaotic swirl of red shirts and righteous fury, signified that this team would not yield. They had stared into the abyss of defeat and walked away unscathed, forging a bond of iron in the fires of conflict. As the leaves fell and the frost of winter hardened the ground, the Arsenal embarked upon a relentless march. Where other armies would tire and falter under the grey English skies, the Invincibles grew stronger. From the turn of the year into the blooming of spring, they strung together 9 consecutive victories, a chain of triumphs that strangled the hope from their pursuers. They played with a fluidity that mocked the rugged conditions, turning muddy pitches into canvases for their art. It was during this span that the world began to realize the prophecy was no mere boast. The team moved as one organism, breathing in unison. They were not merely winning, they were ascending to a plane of existence above the mere mortals of the league. Yet no pilgrimage is without its valley of shadow. In early April, the sky darkened over the Gunners' ambitions. Within the span of a single accursed week, the dream of a treble, a 3-fold crown, was shattered. First, the Manchester rivals expelled them from the FA Cup, and days later, the Blue Knights of Chelsea cast them out of Europe's great tournament. The faithful were distraught. The armor of the Invincibles appeared cracked. The exhaustion of the campaign weighed heavy on their limbs, and whispers of collapse began to circulate among the heathens. It was a test of spirit more than flesh. Would they crumble under the weight of lost silver, or would they remember their primary oath to remain conquerors of the realm, if not the continent? The monastery of Highbury fell silent, waiting for a sign of resurrection. Salvation arrived on Good Friday, though it came disguised as disaster. Facing the mighty Liverpool at Highbury, the Arsenal found themselves trailing, their spirits sagging like wet sails. At the interval, the score stood against them, and the spectre of the first league defeat loomed large. But in the second half, the king, Thierry Henry, decided that destiny was not to be denied. He seized the narrative by the throat. Receiving the ball near the center of the world, he embarked on a slalom run, dancing past defenders as if they were statues of stone, before slotting the ball home. It was a goal of such individual brilliance that it reignited the fire in the belly of the beast. The Gunners roared back to win 4-2, rising from the tomb of their cup exits to reaffirm their dominance. The crisis was averted. The path to glory was cleared. Fate, with its sense of poetic irony, decreed that the crown should be seized in the territory of the fiercest rival. On the 24th of April, the Arsenal travelled the short distance to White Hart Lane, the home of Tottenham Hotspur. To win the league there would be the ultimate sweet nectar. The game was a tense affair, a pendulum swinging between glory and anxiety. Arsenal struck early, displaying their prowess, but the rivals fought back to a 2-2 stalemate. Yet a draw was all that was required. As the final whistle blew, the white corner of North London was stained red. The players danced upon the turf of their enemies, not merely as winners of a match, but as kings of England. They had secured the title with games to spare, an act of dominance performed in the very courtyard of those who wished them ill. With the crown secured, a lesser order might have laid down their weapons and feasted, but the prophecy was not yet fully fulfilled. The 0 in the loss column remained a sacred relic that must be protected at all costs. The final steps of the journey were fraught with the danger of complacency. Matches against Birmingham and Portsmouth were navigated with care, draws that preserved the sanctity of the record. The players were tired, their legs heavy with the miles of the crusade, but their minds were sharpened by history. They knew that to lose now, with the trophy in hand, would be to tarnish the gold with rust. They played not for points, but for eternity. The manager, Wenger, kept their gaze fixed on the horizon, reminding them that championships are forgotten, but invincibility is forever. The 15th of May, the final day. Highbury was bathed in sunshine, prepared for a coronation, yet the script demanded one last twist. The relegated Leicester City, fighting for nothing but pride, took the lead. A hush fell over the temple. Was the great tapestry to be unraveled by the final thread? The half-time whistle blew with the Invincibles trailing. But in the locker room, the Brotherhood looked into one another's eyes and refused to accept mortality. They emerged for the second half with renewed fury. Henri, the inevitable, struck from the penalty mark to equalize. Then the captain Vieira, receiving a pass from the Bergkamp, glided through to score the winner. The roar that greeted the final whistle was not just of joy, but of relief. The circle was closed. 38 games played, 26 victories, 12 draws, 0 defeats. In recognition of a feat that defied the logic of the modern age, the Lords of the Premier League commissioned a unique artifact. While other champions raised a silver trophy, the Invincibles were presented with a golden replica, a shimmering idol to match their achievement. As Patrick Vieira hoisted the golden chalice toward the heavens, the sunlight caught the metal, blinding in its brilliance. It was a moment frozen in time, the culmination of skill, luck, and unyielding will. The players stood upon the podium not just as athletes, but as immortals, having etched their names into a stone that the winds of time cannot erode. They had turned the impossible into history. The crusade did not end with the season's close. The unbeaten run stretched forward into the next campaign, a bridge spanning the summer break. It grew to 49 matches, a number of biblical proportion in the English game, surpassing the ancients of Nottingham. Though the streak would eventually meet its end in the autumn of 2004 amidst controversy and sorrow once again at Old Trafford, the legend was already sealed. As parchment met silence, and this chapter was laid among the guarded chronicles of the Football Monastery, it became a measure by which all others would be judged. The 49 steps remain a monument in the landscape of football, a peak so high that others may climb towards it, but none have yet reached the summit. The Invincibles of 2003-04 walk in the halls of memory, a golden standard by which all other great armies are measured and found wanting. In the annals of the English game, as faithfully recorded and preserved within the guarded chronicles of the Football Monastery, there came a time when the winds of change blew fierce from the east, carrying with them the weight of gold and the promise of empire. The noble house of Chelsea, long lying in the shadows of greater powers, had been fortified by the treasury of the merchant lord Roman Abramovich. Yet gold alone does not forge a kingdom. It requires a general to wield the sword. It was on the 2nd day of June, in the year of our Lord 2004, that a new architect was summoned to the parish of Fulham. He came from the Lusitanian shores, fresh from a miraculous crusade where he had led the dragons of Porto to the summit of Europe. This man was José Mourinho. He did not arrive with the humility of a novice monk, but with the gaze of a conqueror who had already seen the outcome of the battle before the first horn was blown. The old guard, led by the gentle Ranieri, had departed, leaving a foundation upon which a fortress of unyielding stone was to be erected. The scribes and chroniclers of the land gathered in the great hall to hear the first words of the new steward. They expected platitudes, the soft whisperings of a man grateful for his station. Instead, Mourinho ascended the pulpit and delivered a sermon that would echo through the ages. With eyes that burned with a cold, calculating fire, he spoke not of hope, but of certainty. "Please do not call me arrogant," he intoned, his voice steady as a drumbeat, "but I am European champion, and I think I am a special one." A gasp rippled through the congregation. In that singular moment, he baptized himself in the waters of his own confidence. He cast aside the cloak of the ordinary and donned the mantle of the chosen. It was a declaration of war against the established order, a vow that the mediocrity of the past was now heresy. The moniker, the special one, was etched into the stone of history, and the faithful of Stamford Bridge felt a stirring in their souls, a belief that a Messiah had walked among them. With the treasury unlocked, the new commander sought to assemble a legion capable of crushing all resistance. He did not seek mere players, he sought warriors of iron and granite. From the lands of Gaul came Didier Drogba, a battering ram in human form, capable of shattering the gates of any defense. From his old brotherhood in Porto, he summoned Ricardo Carvalho and Paulo Ferreira, loyal lieutenants who knew the secrets of his tactical codex. The giant Petr Cech was placed at the gate, a guardian of such stature that he seemed to block out the sun. Arjen Robben, swift as a courser, arrived to flank the enemy. These new recruits joined the existing knights, the lion-hearted John Terry, the tireless Frank Lampard, and the silent assassin Claude Makelele. It was a convergence of strength and skill, a squad of 28 souls, each ready to lay down their bodies for the cause. The cost was great, exceeding £100 million, but the ambition was priceless. The campaign commenced on the 15th day of August. The enemy was no minor fiefdom, but the mighty Red Devils of Manchester, the rulers of the North. The battlefield was Stamford Bridge, the soil thirsting for glory. The air was thick with tension as the two armies clashed. It was not a battle of chaotic bloodshed, but a chess match of lethal precision. The breakthrough came from the boot of Ida Gudjonsson, a strike swift and true that pierced the red armor. The fortress held. The 1-0 victory was a statement, a signal fire lit upon the high hills. Mourinho's tactical shifting, morphing the shape of his legion from a diamond to a trident of 4-3-3, baffled the enemy. They prioritized the shield over the sword, discipline over flourish. The counterattacks were like lightning strikes, sudden, devastating, and impossible to predict. The realm of the Premier League trembled, for a new power had risen in the west of London. As the months turned and the leaves fell, the true nature of Mourinho's creation was revealed. It was a machine of denial. To score against the Blues was to attempt to draw water from a stone. The goalkeeper, Petr Cech, stood as a colossus, recording clean sheet upon clean sheet, 25 in total, a number that defied the logic of the sport. The defensive line, marshaled by Captain Terry, moved as one organism, a wall of cobalt that refused to break. By the end of the campaign, they would concede a mere 15 goals in the entire season, a record so pure, so absolute, that it seemed divinely ordained. This was not merely defense, it was the art of suffocation. Opponents would arrive with hope and leave with nothing but the dust of defeat in their mouths. The team lost but a single battle in the league, a minor skirmish against Manchester City, but their march towards the throne was otherwise unimpeded. Before the crown of the league could be seized, there was the matter of the Lesser Cup, the Football League Cup. The final was held in the great amphitheatre of Cardiff under the grey skies of February. The adversary was Liverpool, a brotherhood of grit and history. The battle was fierce, spilling into extra time, a test of endurance and spirit. The Blues found themselves trailing, but the spirit instilled by their Portuguese master would not allow for surrender. An own goal by the Liverpool captain gave them life, and then the siege engines roared. Drogba and Cashman struck the decisive blows. The 3-2 victory secured the first silverware of the new era. Mourinho, dancing upon the touchline, tasted the silver of the trophy. It was a foretaste of the feast to come, a warning to the rest of the land that Chelsea's hunger was insatiable. The 30th day of April, a date now holy in the calendar of the faithful, the Blues travelled north to the grim battlegrounds of Bolton. 50 years had passed since Chelsea last wore the crown of England. Half a century of wandering in the wilderness, of near misses and heartbreak, but the penance was at an end. The game was a grind, a physical struggle in the mud, until the vice-captain, Frank Lampard, stepped forward. Like a knight finishing a duel, he struck twice in the second half. His goals were the keys that unlocked the golden age. The final whistle blew and the wait was over. Chelsea were champions of England. The 2-0 victory was the seal on a season of dominance. 95 points, 29 victories. These were not just statistics. They were the measurements of a giant. The ghosts of the past were exorcised, replaced by a living, breathing dynasty. Yet, even in the midst of glory, there was sorrow. The crusade for the Holy Grail of Europe, the Champions League, brought them face to face with Liverpool once more in the semi-finals. They had vanquished giants, including Barcelona and Bayern Munich, to reach this stage. But at Anfield, amidst a cauldron of noise, fate dealt a cruel hand. A goal was awarded to Liverpool, a ghost goal, a phantom strike that Mourinho swore never crossed the line. The injustice burned like bile. The dream of a double triumph was snatched away not by being bested in combat, but by the wavering eye of an official. It was a wound that would not heal quickly, a reminder that even the most fortified castle has a weakness, and that fortune is a fickle mistress who does not always favor the strong. The sun rose on the 2005-2006 season, marking 100 years since the founding of the club. To honor this centenary, the badge was recast, returning to the arrogant lion of old. The squad, already formidable, was reinforced with the energy of Michael Essien and the speed of Sean Wright-Phillips. They began the defense of their title with a ferocity that terrified the realm. 9 games they played at the start, and 9 times they emerged victorious, a record start that signaled the intent of the king to keep his crown. The Charity Shield was seized from Arsenal, and the league campaign became a procession. They did not just win, they strangled the hope out of their rivals before the winter snows had even fallen. Through the deep winter, the blue machine churned on relentlessly. By mid-January, they sat atop the mountain, looking down upon the rest of the league with a lead of 16 points. It was an unassailable gap, a chasm that no other team could bridge. They won 20 of their first 22 encounters. The pundits spoke of a boring dominance, but to the faithful, it was the beautiful monotony of perfection. Stamford Bridge became a fortress where visiting teams arrived as sacrifices. 18 times they played at home in the league, and 18 times they won or drew, suffering 0 defeats on their own soil. The bridge was not just a stadium, it was a graveyard for the ambitions of visiting lords. The final act of the centenary conquest took place on the 29th of April, 2006. The challengers, Manchester United, arrived in London knowing that a defeat would hand the title to their hosts. The script could not have been written more perfectly. Chelsea, in their royal blue, dismantled the Red Devils with a surgical ruthlessness. Gallus, Cole and Carvalho struck the blows in a commanding 3-0 victory. As the third goal hit the net, the stadium erupted in a collective roar of ecstasy. The title was retained. Back-to-back championships, a feat achieved by few. Lampard, the architect of the midfield, finished as the top scorer again, a testament to his enduring brilliance. The trophy was lifted high, catching the gleam of the spring sun, confirming that this was indeed the age of Mourinho. Yet within the walls of this great citadel, a paradox existed. The master, Mourinho, though adored, was a man of exacting standards. He spoke of the silence of the cathedral, lamenting that at times playing at home felt like playing in an empty void. He demanded not just obedience from his players, but fervor from his subjects. He wanted the roar of the crowd to match the intensity of his tactics. This tension between the perfection on the pitch and the atmosphere in the stands only added to the mystique of the era. It was a monastery of football, where the monks prayed in silence, only to erupt in psalms of joy when the final victory was secured. The streets of West London, however, knew no silence during the parades, where the blue flags waved like a turbulent sea. And so the chronicle of these 2 years was written in ink that would never fade. 2 league titles, a league cup and a community shield, records of points and defense that would stand like ancient monuments weathering the storms of time. Mourinho had arrived as a stranger and established a dynasty. He had turned a club of potential into a machine of inevitability. The players, Terry, Lampard, Drogba, Cech, had become legends, their names illuminated in the manuscripts of football history. As this era was laid to rest and its pages returned to the candlelit archives of the Football Monastery, it became clear that its influence would echo far beyond Stamford Bridge. The Cobalt Legion had conquered England, and though the European prize remained elusive, the domestic realm was entirely under their heel. It was a time of iron discipline, of silver tongues, and of a blue tide that washed away the old order forever. In the annals of the beautiful game, there are rivalries that transcend mere sport, echoing the ancient wars of kings and the shifting borders of empires. Herein lies the account, quietly chronicled and set down in parchment within the guarded halls of the Football Monastery, of the great schism that tore the Iberian Peninsula asunder at the turn of the millennium. It was the year of our Lord 2000, a time when the lands of Spain were divided not by stone walls, but by the colors of their banners. To the east lay the proud dominion of Catalonia, defended by the warriors of FC Barcelona, guardians of an identity suppressed but never silenced. To the center stood the imperial might of Real Madrid, the white-clad legions of the Castilian crown, symbols of regal authority and centralized power. These were not merely clubs, they were opposing faiths, and the pitch was their battlefield. Between them flowed a river of bad blood, centuries deep. Yet in this fragile peace, a Portuguese knight named Luis Figo walked as a deity among the Catalans, unaware that the fates were spinning a thread of gold that would soon strangle the heart of a city.
Luis Figo was no common mercenary when he first donned the Blaugrana tunic. He was the chosen one, the standard-bearer for a people who saw in him the reflection of their own defiant spirit. Though born of Portuguese soil, his heart seemed to beat in rhythm with the chants of the Camp Nou. For 5 glorious years he was the architect of their joy, a winger of such dazzling skill that opposing defenders were left twisting in the wind like reeds in a tempest. He wore the captain's armband, a sacred trust rarely bestowed upon a foreigner, yet he carried it with the gravity of a native son. He lifted the UEFA Cup Winners' Cup. He brought the league title back to the faithful. When he spoke, the city listened. When he kissed the badge, the people believed. He was the living embodiment of Mescayan Club, more than a club. To the Catalan faithful, Figo was the fortress that would never fall, the knight whose loyalty was as immutable as the Montserrat mountains. But the heart of man is a labyrinth, and pride often blinds us to the approaching wolf.
While adoration flourished in the east, a shadow was lengthening in the capital of Madrid. The throne of the Real Madrid presidency was contested, and a challenger emerged from the world of commerce, Florentino Perez. He was a man not of the pitch, but of the boardroom, a merchant prince with eyes that saw the world as a ledger of assets and acquisitions. His opponent, The incumbent, Lorenzo Sanz, held the favor of the people, having recently delivered the Holy Grail of the European Cup. To unseat a victor, Perez knew he required a weapon of unimaginable power. He did not seek merely to win an election. He sought to humiliate his enemies and herald a new age of excess, the age of the Galacticos. In the quiet of the night, Perez conceived a stratagem so audacious it bordered on madness. He would steal the crown jewel of Catalonia. He would bring Luis Figo to the Santiago Bernabeu, promising the voters of Madrid the head of their rival's king on a platter of silver. The trap was set not with steel, but with parchment and ink. Emissaries of Perez moved in the shadows, approaching José Vega, the agent of Figo, with a proposition that smelled of sulfur and sweet wine. The terms were a wager against destiny. Perez offered a pre-contract. If he won the election, Figo would join Madrid. If he lost, Figo would keep a king's ransom in coin, over 2 million euros, for doing absolutely nothing. To Figo and his agent, this appeared a game without risk. They looked at the polls and saw Perez as a fool destined for defeat. They believed they could sign the pact, pocket the gold, and use the offer as leverage to demand greater riches from Barcelona. It was a gamble made in arrogance. But hidden within the scroll was a clause of iron. Should Perez win, and should Figo refuse to cross the divide, a penalty of 30 million euros would be levied, a sum that would ruin him. They signed their names, believing the storm would never break, unknowingly selling a legacy for a promise of leverage. Rumors, like smoke, cannot be contained forever. As the election in Madrid drew near, whispers of the betrayal drifted across the arid plains to the humid coast of Barcelona. The faithful were agitated, their sleep disturbed by the spectre of treason. Yet the idol spoke, and his words were a soothing balm. In the days before the vote, with the eyes of the world upon him, Luis Figo stood before the press and swore an oath. "I want to assure them," he proclaimed, his voice steady, "that Luis Figo will with absolute certainty be at the Camp Nou to start the new season." He mocked the very idea of the contract, calling it madness. He held up the shirt of Barcelona and declared his love. The people exhaled, their fears assuaged by the word of their captain. They did not know they were listening to a man who was already trapped, a prisoner of his own signature, dancing on the edge of a blade. The 16th day of July, in the year 2000, the ballots were cast in the Spanish capital. The improbable became reality. The impossible was made flesh. Florentino Perez, the merchant with the golden tongue, was elected president of Real Madrid. The news struck the Figo camp like a hammer blow to the temple. The wager was lost. The clause was activated. The realization dawned with horrific clarity. Figo must now join the enemy or face financial annihilation. There was no escape. The safe bet had become a death sentence for his reputation. In Barcelona, the celebration of the summer sun turned instantly to a winter of the soul. The man who had sworn loyalty just days prior was now bound by law to the White House of Castile. The ground beneath the Camp Nou seemed to tremble, not from an earthquake, but from the collective shattering of 1,000,000 hearts. The transaction was completed with the cold efficiency of an execution. Real Madrid arrived at the gates of the league offices bearing a chest of gold such as the world had never seen. 62 million euros, 10,000 million pesetas. It was a world record fee, a sum that could build castles or equip armies. They paid the buyout clause, bypassing any negotiation with Barcelona. The Catalan club was helpless, watching their heritage stripped away by the brute force of capital. Figo was flown to Madrid, his face pale, his eyes devoid of the joy that usually accompanies such riches. He was paraded not as a signing, but as a spoil of war. He held the white jersey of Real Madrid, the number 10 emblazoned upon it, looking less like a conqueror and more like a hostage of his own ambition. The deal was done. The knight had changed his colors. The betrayal was absolute. In Catalonia, the love for Luis Figo curdled instantly into a hate of biblical proportions. It was a grief that demanded fire. In the streets of Barcelona, the jerseys bearing his name, once worn with such pride, were piled into pyres. The smoke of burning polyester rose into the Mediterranean sky, a black signal of the broken covenant. He was no longer Luis, he was Judas. He was the pesetero, the money grabber. The walls of the city were daubed with graffiti cursing his lineage. The betrayal was felt not just as a sporting loss, but as a personal insult to every grandmother, father, and child who had chanted his name. He had not just left, he had defected to the one enemy they could not abide. He had chosen the gold of the oppressor over the love of the oppressed. The stage was set for a reckoning, a date circled in blood on the calendar, October the 21st, the return of the traitor.
The day arrived, heavy with menace. October 21st, 2000. Figo returned to the Camp Nou, but the sanctuary had become a tribunal of sound. As the bus carrying the White Knights of Madrid approached the stadium, it was met with stones and fury. Inside the dressing room, the air lay thick with dread. When Figo emerged from the tunnel to step upon the hallowed turf he had once called home, the noise became physical. 111 decibels, not measured but felt. A howl like a curse spoken by thousands. A banshee's lament woven from hatred and betrayal. 98,000 souls whistled as one, a single shriek forged to pierce the spirit of the oathbreaker. Figo, shaken, raised his hands to his ears, shielding himself from the verdict of a people he had forsaken. There was no football to be played that night. There was only judgment. The match itself was a secondary spectacle to the theater of hate unfolding in the stands. Every time the Portuguese touched the ball, the roar intensified. But it was not just sound that assaulted him. From the tiers of the Camp Nou rained a tempest of debris. Lighters, bottles, oranges, and coins cascaded onto the pitch. But most damning were the thousands of fake banknotes printed in the orange hue of the 10,000 peseta bill, but bearing the face of Figo in place of the king. They fluttered down like autumn leaves, a mockery of his greed. "Take it, Judas," they cried. "Here is the gold you sought." The danger was so palpable that Figo, the master of the corner kick, refused to approach the corner flag, fearing the proximity to the crowd. He stayed in the center, a king in exile, while his team crumbled under the pressure, losing 2-0. The fortress had held, and the traitor had been scourged.
Time, they say, heals all wounds. But in the monastery's rivalry, time only allows hatred to ferment into a more potent vintage. 2 years passed. It was November in the year of our Lord 2002. Figo returned once more. Surely the rage had cooled. Surely the fire had burned itself out. Nay, the hate had hardened into something colder, more precise. This time, Figo resolved not to cower. He walked to the corner flag to take the kick, a defiant act of provocation. The sky turned dark with projectiles. Whiskey bottles, golf balls, and knives fell around him. He smiled a wry, nervous smile, giving a thumbs up to the crowd, mocking their fury. The police shielded him with plastic barriers, like riot troops protecting a dictator. And then from the abyss of the stands came the offering that would define the era. It landed on the turf with a dull thud, mere yards from the boots of the traitor. Amidst the plastic bottles and the debris, there lay the severed head of a suckling pig. It stared vacantly with dead eyes, a grotesque symbol of the gluttony and filth the fans attributed to their former idol. It was a medieval gesture, a curse made flesh. The referee, Medina Cantalejo, paused, staring in disbelief at the profane object. The game was halted. The players were ushered off the field as the stadium teetered on the brink of anarchy. This was no longer sport. It was a public shaming, a ritual of excommunication performed by 90,000 bishops of the faith. The image of that pig's head lying on the holy grass of Camp Nou was seared into the history of the world, a testament to the fact that for the Catalan people, this was not business, it was blood.
Luis Figo would go on to achieve great things in the white of Madrid. He lifted the La Liga trophy, he hoisted the Champions League cup toward the heavens. His bank vaults overflowed with the gold he had secured. Yet the shadow of his transfer never truly lifted. He played with the brilliance of a master, but also with the heaviness of a man who knows he can never go home. He had traded adoration for admiration, love for respect, and a legacy of belonging for a legacy of success. In the eyes of history, he became a galactico, a star in a galaxy of stars, but he ceased to be the beating heart of a people. The contract signed in secret had delivered all the riches of the world, but it had exacted a price that no coin could repay, the loss of his innocence. And so the chronicle of the Judas of Camp Nou is written into the parchment of eternity. It serves as a grim parable for all who walk the path of the professional athlete. In the grand theatre of football, as in the courts of medieval kingdoms, gold may purchase power. It may buy titles, estates, and the envy of men. But gold can never buy forgiveness. There are thresholds that, once crossed, turn to stone behind the traveler. Luis Figo crossed such a threshold in the summer of 2000. He walked through the door of the Bernabeu and found that the door to Barcelona had been walled up forever, sealed by the mortar of betrayal. As this tale was laid among the somber chronicles of the Football Monastery, returned to silence and candlelight,
its lesson was left to linger for those who would listen. He remains, to this day, a legend divided, a hero to the crown and a villain to the country. And in the quiet corners of the monastery, the monks still whisper, "Beware the promise of the merchant, for the cost of the coin is often the soul." In the annals of the English game, as faithfully recorded and kept in vigil within the chronicles of the Football Monastery, few epochs of suffering were as prolonged as that of the loyalists of Manchester City. For 44 years since the year of our Lord 1968, the coveted crown of Albion had eluded their grasp. They dwelt in the long, cold shadow of their neighbours, the Red Legion of Old Trafford, who had amassed gold and glory, while the sky blues knew only humility and false dawns. Yet, as the sun rose on the 13th day of May in the year 2012, a strange energy coursed through the cobblestones of Manchester. The two great houses, blue and red, stood equal upon the precipice of destiny, level on points, separated only by the slender thread of goal difference. The blue moon was poised to rise, but history had taught this congregation to fear the cruelest of fates. The faithful gathered at the Etihad, a fortress of steel and hope, praying that this day would not be another chapter of lamentations, but the day of deliverance. The adversary on this day of judgment was the Queen's Park Rangers, a ragtag band of warriors fighting for their very survival in the High League. Led by Mark Hughes, a former commander of the city garrison, now turned rival tactician, they came not to conquer, but to endure. The air within the Etihad was thick, a tapestry woven from threads of anxiety and anticipation. The citizens of the sky-blue realm knew that a victory would secure the crown, regardless of the Red Legion's doings in the distant lands of Sunderland. The battlefield was pristine, the banners unfurled, and the roar of 48,000 souls shook the foundations of the earth. It was a siege set up, the wealthy lords of City against the desperate scrappers of the Rangers. But in the realm of football, as in war, the size of the purse does not always dictate the swing of the sword. The whistle blew, a shrill cry signaling the commencement of the final crusade. The early skirmishes were tense, the city knights probing the defenses of the Rangers with caution and fear. News arrived via whispers and signal fires that the Red Legion of United had struck a blow at Sunderland. Wayne of the House of Rooney had scored. The pressure upon the Etihad grew heavy, like a stone upon the chest. But in the 39th minute, a hero emerged from the rear guard. Pablo Zabaleta, the Argentine warrior known for his heart of iron, ventured forth. Receiving a pass from the giant Yaya Touré, whose strides covered the turf like a colossus, Zabaleta unleashed a strike. The ball, a sphere of destiny, took flight and found the back of the net, slipping through the hands of the keeper, Paddy Kenny. The fortress erupted. A primal roar of relief ascended to the heavens. At the halftime bell, the score stood 1-0, and the crown seemed destined for the blue side of the city. Alas, comfort is a dangerous sedative for the warrior. As the second half commenced, a lapse in concentration plagued the city defense. Just 3 minutes after the restart, a calamity befell them. Jolyon Lescott, a stalwart of the back line, headed the ball astray, a fatal miscalculation. Like a wolf
pouncing on a stray lamb, Jibril Cissé of the Rangers seized the moment. With terrifying speed, he raced towards the goal and struck true past the guardian Joe Hart. Silence fell upon the cathedral. The score was levelled at 1 apiece. The ghost of failures past began to haunt the aisles and terraces. The joy of Zabaleta's strike evaporated like mist in the morning sun, replaced by the cold, creeping dread that the title was slipping away to the waiting hands of Sir Alex Ferguson and his Red Horde. The drama turned to chaos, and the pitch became a theatre of the absurd. Joey Barton, a knight of volatile temperament and former servant of the city, lost his composure entirely. In a fit of rage, he struck the noble Carlos Tevez with his elbow. The arbiter of justice, the referee Dean, brandished the red card, banishing Barton from the field. Yet the rogue knight would not leave quietly. In a display of berserker fury, he kneed the angelic Aguero and sought to headbutt the captain company. It was bedlam. The Rangers were reduced to 10 men, a weakened force. Surely now, the faithful thought, the city legions would crush their depleted foe and reclaim their destiny. But the gods of football are capricious, and pride often comes before a fall. It is written that the darkest hour comes when hope seems most secure. Despite their numerical advantage, the city host faltered. In the 66th minute, the unthinkable occurred. The Rangers, besieged and battered, mounted a rare counterattack. Armand Traoré, swiftly moving down the flank, delivered a cross of wicked precision. Jamie Mackie, arriving like a thief in the night, threw himself at the ball. His header bounced into the earth and up into the roof of the net. 1-2. The Etihad gasped. The air sucked from 40,000 lungs simultaneously. The impossible had happened. The relegation-threatened 10-man army of QPR led the would-be champions. The dream lay in ruins. Time became a torture device. The minutes bled away. Each second a hammer blow to the hearts of the Sky Blues. The manager, Roberto Mancini, a man of Italian passion, paced the sidelines, cursing the heavens, his face a portrait of agony. In the stands, grown men wept openly, burying their faces in their scarves. Some, unable to bear the torture of witnessing the death of their dream, began to leave the stadium, their footsteps heavy with the accumulated sorrow of 4 decades. The chronicle of typical city was being written once more in the cruelest ink imaginable. They had climbed the mountain only to stumble at the very peak. The commentary from the wireless spoke of the celebrations beginning in the north, where the Red Legion prepared to lift the trophy once again. 90 minutes had passed. The 4th official raised the tablet. 5 minutes of added time. 5 minutes to reverse the currents of history. It seemed a task for saints, not men. But the city players, driven by the desperation of the damned, surged forward one last time. They laid siege to the QPR goal, wave after wave crashing against a wall of white hoops. The ball would not enter. The goalkeeper Kenny performed miracles. The defenders threw their bodies into the line of fire like martyrs. The stadium was a cauldron of noise, a mix of screams, prayers, and the wailing of the distressed.
Hope was a flickering candle in a hurricane.
91 minutes and 15 seconds. A corner kick was awarded to the hosts. David Silva, the magician of the midfield, curled the ball into the heart of the melee. Rising above the chaos was the tall Bosnian, Edin Dzeko. With the stoicism of an executioner, he met the ball with his brow. The net bulged. 2-2. A glimmer of light pierced the darkness. The crowd roared, not with triumph, but with frantic urgency. "Get the ball!" they screamed. There was no celebration, only a rush to the center circle. One more goal was needed, one more miracle. The clock ticked mercilessly on. 92 minutes.
At the Stadium of Light in Sunderland, the whistle had blown. The battle there was over. Manchester United had won. They stood upon the pitch, waiting, listening to the wireless, preparing to be crowned Kings of England. At the Etihad, the clock read 93 minutes. The sands of time were all but spent. City's possession felt desperate, almost ritualistic in its futility. Nigel de Jong pushed the ball forward, a simple pass, a final offering. It fell into chaos. Mario Balotelli was swallowed by red and white shirts, pressed from every side. In the struggle he stumbled, then fell, yet even from the ground, in a moment of instinct and defiance, he slid and brushed the ball with the tip of his boot, diverting it away from the melee. It rolled to Sergio Aguero, the Argentine angel, 30 yards from goal. He was weary, his legs were leaden, but destiny had chosen this moment and this man to rewrite the scriptures of the Premier League.
He drew back his foot and struck. The ball flew low and hard to the near post. Paddy Kenny Dove, but the hand of fate is faster than the hand of man. The net rippled. The universe exploded. "Aguero!" came the cry from the commentator Martin Tyler, a scream that would echo through eternity. It was a sound never heard before, a mixture of disbelief, ecstasy, and violent joy. Aguero tore his shirt from his body and wheeled away in delirium. The stadium shook to its very core. Strangers embraced, enemies wept together, and the ghosts of 1968 finally found their rest. In the dying breath of the season, Manchester City had snatched the crown from the head of the rival. What followed was not merely celebration, but pandemonium. In the stands, the transition from the depths of hell to the peaks of paradise caused a rapture of emotion. It was the greatest finish to a campaign in the history of the sport. QPR too found salvation, for news arrived that Bolton had failed to win, sparing the Londoners from the drop. But the day belonged to the Blue Moon. The final whistle blew moments later, confirming the miracle. The pitch vanished beneath a sea of fans, a joyous invasion of the faithful, claiming their holy ground. As the trophy was lifted high by the captain Vincent Kompany, the sun set on the old order. Manchester City were champions of England, the first to win the Premier League on goal difference alone. It was a victory forged in the fires of adversity, a testament to the belief that until the final whistle blows, all is not lost. The goal at 93-44 became a sacred relic in the memory of the club, a story to be told from generation to generation.
as the echoes of that final moment faded and this chapter was gently returned to the guarded archives of the Football Monastery, its meaning was sealed in silence and candlelight. The long winter was over. The blue moon had risen, and it shone with a brilliance that would blind the world. Thus ends the chronicle of the miracle of May.